Open up your little atheist book to page 18, please. And we're going to walk through these Embolden questions together, and then we'll read some of chapter 2. So question number 1, oopsie, what do I have there? Oh, I don't know what I have there.
Is that paper?
It's a card tonight. So list the 4 categories of reasons why people believe what they believe. What's one of those categories? Yes.
They were taught.
What?
Or they were taught.
Well, they're specific names for them. Religious reasons. What would be included in religious reasons?
Scripture, church, guru.
Pastor, guru, yeah.
Oh, I mean,
So religious reasons is one. Pastor, scripture, youth group leader, guru. You believe what they tell you, but they aren't necessarily telling you the truth, right? And you have no way to know through that. Okay, what's another one? What's another category? Yes?
Volitional.
No, volitional is a part of this. This is how we know the truth. Yes?
Sociological.
Sociological. What's included in sociological reasons for believing something? Your parents.
Friends.
Your friends. Culture, society. Yeah. So you believe what your friends believe, or you believe what your parents believe, or you believe what the television is telling you. Again, not necessarily an accurate source of information. What's a third one? Yes, Larissa.
Psychological.
Psychological. What's included in psychological?
Comfort.
Comfort. I believe this because it brings me comfort.
Identity.
It helps me know who I think I am. Gives me peace. Gives me hope. Purpose. What's the last one?
Oh,
philosophical. Philosophical reasons are those that are consistent. It gives consistency. It gives coherence. Coherence means that it holds together. And it's the best answer from the evidence. It's evidence-based. Of those 4, which is the only one that is known to be accurate, that you can know it is accurate? No? Philosophical. It's what the evidence shows. It's what is consistent and coherent. People use all those other reasons, and what they're hearing or reading might be true, but it might not. We're going to base what I'm teaching you this year based on the evidence. We're going to find truth based on evidence. So number 2, write down some reasons why you believe what you believe. Write down why you believe what you believe. Now, remember that whole dialogue between Dr. James Sire and the college students about, is this a good reason to believe? Is this a good reason to believe something? What do you think for the main points of that conversation. Like, what did Dr. Sire want the students to get from it? Tell me what was happening then. Let's start there. What was happening in that part of the chapter? Oh, he was asking questions about what? Why we believe what we believe. And we've just been over those 4 different reasons people believe something. And so, what was Dr. Sire's point? A little exercise. I know, it's scintillating discussion. Which reason did they decide was a good reason to believe? Yeah. Philosophical reasons, something that is well reasoned, something that is that holds together, it's consistent, and it's based on the evidence. All the other reasons are not good reasons to believe something. Could what your parents be telling you be true? Absolutely. Are your parents infallible? No. Psychological. Just because something gives you comfort doesn't make it true. Religious. Look, if the Bible is true, and that's part of what we're going to prove this year, then the Quran is not. And people believe that. They believe it sincerely. But if the Bible is true, the Quran is technically vice versa as well. But we're gonna talk a lot about knowing that the Bible is true. So I think the point that Dr. Sire was trying to make is that you need to know what you believe and why you believe, and you need to base it off of something that is true. The only things worth trusting are those things that point to the truth. And you have to figure that out using philosophical reasoning. Of the 4 reasons of belief, sociological, psychological, religious, and philosophical, which reason do you tend to use as evidence for Christianity? So go ahead and write down your answer to that. For me, I said philosophical now, but probably sociological as a younger person, that it was what I was taught by my church, my parents. Then on page 53, what is the role of an apologist? Yes, Hayden.
Someone who shows how good reason is.
Yep, someone who uses good reason and evidence to support some belief. You need to go where the evidence takes you. I think I told you this already, but when Josh was little, he went through a series of identities, and each time he really thought he was that thing. Started out with being a detective. He believed he really was a detective. He solved a number of cases around our home. Then he was a cowboy. He really believed he was a cowboy. He had the lasso and the boots and the outfit to prove it. Of course, as well. And finally, he still believes he's Batman. He's believed he was Batman since he was about 7 years old. But when he was in his detective phase, we're driving in the car. It's Christmas time. I make some innocuous statement about Christmas. Like, just completely not anything about, is Santa Claus real? And he looks at me and he says, then Santa Claus isn't real? And I said, how did you get that out of what I just said? And his answer was, Mom, I'm a detective. There were too many clues. And that is how we are to determine what is right. What is true is by the evidence. And we'll be spending a lot of time doing that this year. Open up your big atheist book, please, to page 50-something. 54, page 54. And remember, I spoke to you yesterday about Ravi Zacharias. This story includes Ravi Zacharias. What he's saying is true, even if his life didn't reflect everything that he believed. So Western logic versus Eastern logic is where we're starting. As a Christian, and please read as I read. You read along as you listen to me read. That is how you learn the best. As a Christian apologist, author, and native of India, Ravi Zacharias travels the world giving evidence for the Christian faith. He has an incisive intellect, he's a very smart guy, and an engaging personality, which makes him a favorite on college and university campuses. Following a recent presentation on an American campus regarding the uniqueness of Christ, Ravi was assailed, sort of accosted, not literally, by one of the university's professors for not understanding Eastern logic. Yes.
Oh, my book doesn't say that.
The book has nothing about Ravi Zacharias in it.
No, mine doesn't.
Hers says, it says the Western logic versus Eastern logic, and then it goes into like some relativists.
Yeah.
They must have taken Ravi Zacharias.
Mine has Ravi Zacharias. Mine does too.
Okay, so they're made books, and they took Ravi Zacharias out.
They took out the entire thing.
That's what's a question.
Okay, well, I don't have that book, so if you could look on with a neighbor, I'm going to keep reading this, and then I'm going to check out what your book says. Thank you for, nobody in the other class had a new book then, because or they just didn't see it. Just thought I was crazy, maybe. Okay, so let's move on. Following a recent presentation on an American campus regarding the uniqueness of Christ, Ravi was assailed by one of the university's professors for not understanding Eastern logic. During the question and answer period, the professor charged Dr. Zacharias, your presentation about Christ claiming and proving to be the only way to salvation is wrong for people in India because you're using either or logic. In the East, we don't use either or logic. That's Western. In the East, we use both and logic. So salvation is not either through Christ or nothing else, but both Christ and other ways. Ravi found this very ironic because, after all, he grew up in India. Yet here was a Western-born American professor telling Ravi that he didn't understand how things really worked in India. This was so intriguing that Ravi accepted the professor's invitation to lunch in order to discuss it further. One of the professor's colleagues joined them for lunch, and as he and Ravi ate, the professor used every napkin and placemat on the table to make it his point about the two types of logic, one Western and one Eastern. There are two types of logic, the professor kept insisting. No, you don't mean that, Ravi kept replying. I absolutely do, maintained the professor. This went on for better than 30 minutes, the professor lecturing, writing, and diagramming. He became so engrossed in making his points that he forgot to eat his meal, which was slowly congealing on his plate. Upon finishing his own meal, Ravi decided to unleash the roadrunner tactic to rebut the confused but insistent professor. He interrupted, "Professor, I think we can resolve this debate very quickly with just one question." Looking up from his furious drawing, the professor paused and said, "Okay, go ahead." Ravi leaned forward, looking directly at the professor, and asked him, "Are you saying that when I'm in India, I must use either the both and logic or nothing else?" The professor looked blankly at Ravi and then repeated his question with emphasis. "Are you saying that when I'm in India, I must use either," Ravi paused for effect, "the both and logic, or," another pause, "nothing else?" Ravi later commented to us that the next words out of the professor's mouth were worth the time listening to his incoherent ramblings. After glancing sheepishly to his colleague, embarrassed, the professor looked down at his congealed meal and mumbled, "The either or does seem to emerge, doesn't it?" Ravi added, "Yes, even in India, we look both ways before we cross the street because it is either me or the bus, but not both of us." Indeed, the either or does seem to emerge. The professor was using the either or logic to try to prove the both and logic, which is the same problem everyone experiences who tries to argue against the first principles of logic. They wind up sawing off the very limb on which they sit. Imagine if the professor had said, "Ravi, your math calculations are wrong in India because you're using Western math instead of Eastern math." Or suppose he had declared, "Ravi, your physics calculations don't apply in India because you're using Western gravity rather than Eastern gravity." We would immediately see the folly, the foolishness of the professor's reasoning. In fact, despite what the relativists believe, things work in the East just like they work everywhere else. In India, just like in the United States, buses hurt when they hit you. 2 plus 2 equals 4, and the same gravity keeps everyone on the ground. Likewise, murder is wrong there just as it is here. Truth is truth, no matter what country you come from. And truth is truth, no matter what you believe about it. Just as the same gravity keeps all people on the ground, whether they believe it or not, the same logic applies to all people, whether they believe it or not. So what's the point? The point is that there's only one type of logic that helped us discover truth. It's the one built into nature, the nature of reality, that we can't avoid using. Despite this, people will try to tell you that logic doesn't apply to reality, or logic doesn't apply to God, or there are different types of logic, and so on. But as they say such things, they are using the very logic that they are denying. This is like using the laws of arithmetic to prove that arithmetic cannot be trusted. It's important to note that we are not simply engaging in word games here. The Roadrunner tactic uses the undeniable laws of logic to expose that much of what our common culture believes about truth, religion, and morality is undeniably false. That which is self-defeating cannot be true, but many Americans believe it anyway. We contradict ourselves at our own peril. To be burned or not to be burned, that is the question. The Roadrunner tactic is so effective because it utilizes the law of non-contradiction. This is one of the first principles of logic, and you're going to need to know these. The law of non-contradiction is a self-evident first principle of thought that says contradictory claims cannot both be true at the same time in the same sense. In short, it says that the opposite of true is false. We also know this law intuitively and use it every day. Suppose you see a married couple on the street one day, friends of yours, and you ask the wife if it's true that she's expecting a baby. If she says yes and her husband says no, you don't say, "Thanks a lot, that really helps me out." You think maybe she hasn't told him, or maybe they misunderstood the question, or maybe something worse. There's one thing you know for sure: they can't both be right. The law of non-contradiction makes that self-evident to you. When investigating any question of fact, including questions of God, the same law of non-contradiction applies. Either the theists are right, God exists, or the atheists are right, God doesn't exist. Both cannot be correct. Likewise, either Jesus died and rose from the dead, as the Bible claims, or he did not, as the Quran claims. One is right and the other is wrong. In fact, a medieval Muslim philosopher by the name of Avicenna suggested a surefire way to correct someone who denies the law of non-contradiction. He said that anyone who denies the law of non-contradiction should be beaten and burned until he admits that to be beaten is not the same as to not be beaten, and to be burned is not the same as to not be burned. A bit extreme, but you get the point. While reasonable people have no problem with the law of non-contradiction, some very influential, that's the word, philosophers have denied it implicitly in their teachings. Perhaps the two most influential of these are David Hume and Emmanuel Kant. Many people have never heard of Hume and Kant, but their teachings have affected the modern mind greatly. That's why it's important that we take a brief look at each one of them. We'll start with Hume. Now, I'm going to look in your book because I may stop reading there because I don't know that we can get through all of it. So what I want you to do is to answer questions 1 and 2 in the Equip on page 19. You can talk about those together and answer those questions. And then we'll pick up with Hume and Kant tomorrow. Hume and Kant are philosophers from yesteryear, from a long time ago. And it is very deep and difficult to understand. So I want to have time to walk you through that. So answer those questions and then you're done.